Okay, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today we're talking about why we stopped using ladders and hurdles at our sessions for speed and agility work. So I've got Nick back. We're going to talk a little bit about the background to this and why we eventually got rid of it. I guess the common belief was that, certainly from my point of view, that if we use ladders and hurdles and all the fancy equipment, it'd mean better agility and better speed for football and other sports. But obviously we looked at it and we came to realise that maybe wasn't the case. And we know there's a lot of coaches listening to this that use them. There'll be a lot of parents that go to sessions and see them being used and think it's a good thing. But we just want to go back, I guess, go through some of our experience with them and some of the research around it as well. Because it goes back to when we went on that course at Birmingham City.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with it all. This company came to do a presentation on SAQ, work, speed, agility, quickness, and I was hooked immediately. And we ended up then qualifying in it. We went and I did an advanced trainer course. A good few of our coaches did the specific football course for it. And started a session specifically on a Tuesday night where it was a lot of this. A lot of focus on this side of things, and really enjoyed that session. It got really popular, but I just think over time we just started to look at it a little bit more objectively and saw that as opposed to the ladders and hurdles, it was the TIG style games that were having more of an impact, not specifically for football, but in terms of, you'd maybe call it basic movement, basic agility or whatever, those sorts of games were having much more of an effect than running through ladders, running through hurdles, straight line running and so forth. But the kids really enjoyed it and the session just evolved over time and then led us into PE, didn't it, really? Because it was more, we were developing more physical literacy as opposed to sport-specific speed and agility. And a lot of those principles that we had in that session, we've then followed on with our PE lessons. It's a lot of, all the kids are moving all the time, maximum movement, but lots of reacting to opponents as opposed to us saying, run through there, run like this, run like that. No, so there's no pre-planned movement stuff. Because I think when we first started it, I was looking at it, I was trying to find the yeses. Yeah, that this works because of this. Look at that, he's getting faster, she's getting faster, whatever. And it was lots of confirmation bias for me, and it was you that started to question it and question me to look at it a little bit more objectively and actually say, well, is it developing them? Is it developing agility and speed for football or whatever sport they were playing? Is it actually doing that, or is it doing something different? So can you talk to us, Nick, about your thoughts, what you thought was the problem really with the ladders and the hurdles?
I think ladders and hurdles come from a good place. Like a lot of things, agility is massively important in lots of sports. So being able to improve that is obviously going to be a positive thing. People view agility as quick changes of speed and direction. When you see people going through ladders and hurdles, you can see that. And then when other people see other people using ladders and hurdles, again it spreads and people think it's a good idea. But it's like you said, it's when you look a bit more closely at it, it's not really doing what people expect it to be doing. I think the two main issues are firstly, like you've talked about pre-planned movements, things like that. Any movement in any sport is as a result of something happening in that game environment. So as a result of the position of the ball, the players, teammates, opponents, space, as a result of all of that going on, people will move. In agility training sessions, people are asked to move to follow an instruction. So that's not linked anymore. The perception and the action is decoupled. So that's an issue. You can't train the two things separately. They are one movement. And then the second part is, even if you could separate those two things, I say you can't separate them. You can separate them. What I'm saying when you're saying can't is you won't see then the improvement in the football match at a weekend if you're decoupling those things. But the second thing is the actual movements themselves. I don't feel are very football realistic. If you're playing football, there's going to be infinite amount of possible movements you could do. We've played football for however many years. We could play football tomorrow and move in ways that we've never moved before. So that's what agility is, and that's why agility is so important. So then it seems a bit that it doesn't make sense to train agility by asking people to use very rigid movements in a repeated way. And also, and you think about some movements through ladders and hurdles, like turn to the side, high knees, pump your arms, going through the ladders. You don't do that when you're playing football. So it didn't seem to make sense from that aspect. But the biggest one is the perception action. Players, athletes, humans move in response to something. Traditional agility training doesn't have anything to respond to. It is just following a movement pattern. And even when you look at studies into that, when people are just doing running training, if it's running training in response to a real life stimulus versus running predetermined, pre-planned, you move in different ways. There's more lateral movement when it's a predetermined movement, so you're not even moving in the same way in training as you would in the game. Like we talked about before, like basketball shots, when you're practicing shooting in basketball, if you add a defender into that, you start to move and shoot in a very different way. So what that's essentially saying is that you're training in one way, but that way that you're training, that movement that you're using in training, is not going to be used in the game. The whole point of training is to get better at the game. So it can't make sense to do things that you're not going to then use in the game.
The thing you mentioned there as well about that, I guess it's a stimulus, something that you respond to. It's funny you say it, because it was only yesterday I've been looking at a football fitness course, part of the FCE stuff that we've been doing on the mentorship. And one of the things that they were talking about was there was studies that showed that if you get two players to sprint in a straight line, do sprint training, they won't run as fast
As they would do in a game.
As they would do, and it's because of that. And they use like a metaphor of, if I ask you to sprint 100 yards down there, you'll do it. But then if I put a lion behind you, and it makes sense. And so they were showing you different activities where the players were just sprinting, but then they just put a football there, and the coach played out of football, and two had to sprint after it, and it was different. It was different there. You mentioned perception action. For the parents and coaches listening to this, just 30 seconds, explain that, because it is an important point.
It would just be that every movement that is done, whether that's a real football specific movement like a pass or a dribble, but every movement, if you're going to press someone, if the ball gets moved and you drop off 2 yards into a defensive position, it don't have to be you're about to pass the ball. It could be any movement on a football pitch is always in response to what the other players are doing, your teammates, the opponents, and the position of the ball. The ball is there, we stood in one position, the ball then gets switched to the other side of the play. Even if it's not come to you, you are going to move in response to that. The movement that you do based on the perception that's come before it needs to be seen as one whole thing, whereas traditionally coaching and teaching has split those two apart, and people just train the action, just train the kicking of the ball, just train stepping through hurdles, with the idea that you can then put those back together and improve performance in the game environment. And it's just been shown that it doesn't work, it doesn't transfer to the game, learning's reduced. So that's why we always try to keep it together. And like I gave the basketball earlier, dribbling through cones versus dribbling through a defender are two very different things, and how you will actually dribble are really different. The one against a defender is closer to how you will dribble in a game, so that will transfer to the game, whereas the one against cones wouldn't do, and it can actually lead to negative transfer if you're asking players to move in ways that they wouldn't move in the game, but they're training to do that. Then when they're in that game situation, they're in a worse position than they were without having that training.
Thanks for that. I just think it's good for people to know that it's a good thing, especially for the coaches listening to this as well. I think so to finish that part then, so the equipment, we're not saying it's a waste of time. What we're saying is that if you're looking to improve speed and agility for a sport, whether it be football or what have you, then try to train in that context, because you might be able to, let's say, look at coordination, agility. Could we say that the equipment might help what we'd class as basic agility, basic coordination? It's not, but that might not transfer to.
Yeah, the idea that agility is a generic thing, and you are agile, and you can apply that in any context is again just misguided. If you think about a top attacking footballer who's able to do a really good step over, showing a good agility in a football context, that doesn't mean that that person could go into a rugby context and have a really effective sidestep in an attacking environment. It's not generic like that. Likewise, an agile attacker in football doesn't necessarily have good agility when it comes to defending in football. They're different things. When you're attacking in football, you're usually trying to separate yourself from a defender, so using certain movements to create a gap between you and a defender, whereas defending, you're trying to close that gap, so they could be quite different movements, and it doesn't mean that you're agile in one and not agile in the other. And then there's always, as with everything, individual differences, so I might have good change of direction agility, so I might be more likely to be looking to do shoulder drops and get past a player like that. You might be really quick in a straight line, so you're just going to knock it and go. So it depends on the sport, depends on which part of the sport. Are you attacking, are you defending? And it depends on the individual and their own characteristics. So that's been, I think, a big problem with agility training. It's seen as this generic thing that will fix any sport and any activity. If you're a tennis player, a football player, an ice skater, you come to an agility session and that's going to benefit you in the sport. And it's just saying that isn't going to do that. It's just very, very, very generic movement stuff, which isn't really going to improve you at your own sport.
We were talking just before we hit record on this about the ecological dynamics online agility course I'd done in preparation for this, because I was sold on this stuff, and I believe if you can make a child faster and more agile and stuff, it's only going to benefit them. But the more I've got into it, the more I've realised that but it needs to be done in the context of the game. But this showed you two pros, two of the best. It showed you Ronaldo and it showed you Mo Salah, and it showed you them in a football match. And Salah's was an amazing clip. He sort of danced past three defenders, but really tight area just outside the box. But then it showed you them both playing a different sport, and it just polar opposite, just so much more wooden. I mean, they could play it obviously, but the agility from the football to, I think it was basketball they were both playing, it was just night and day. And that's two athletes, two of the best to possibly have ever played the game, and so this is what we're trying to say, that just because they are amazing in that particular sport, it might not transfer. And it's about, they've trained football for years and years and years and years and years, and so their agility is based in their context, and that's why they're able to do what they can do. But that might not mean that they're also going to be amazing at other sports. I think as well as it was stuff like looking at for kids in particular, look at the ladders and look at the stride length, look at the rungs of the ladder, and it's like, what is that forcing them to do? Is that real? Where they're having to take smaller steps a lot of the time through those ladders and hurdles. Is that real? All these little things.
There will be times when players take smaller steps in the game, but that'll come about purely because of the situation. It'll be the presence of defenders and a really tight gap, and that response to that the solution might be small steps, but it has to come from the problem that they've been faced first of all. Just asking them to move through ladders using small feet because you think they might end up in a situation like that in a game. The link isn't there. The movement always is the result of some perception, as
opposed to what I certainly used to do a lot of: put your foot there, there, move forwards, move sideways, and all that. And as I say, we started to just see that the TIG style games, the bulldog style games,
because you're reacting to a defender.
For those 90s kids listening, Bulldogs, best game ever. Those were the games that was closer to what we were looking for, but still not within the actual sport context. But moving on, it's kind of looking at what is agility and speed and what it means in football, and it's what you said earlier. In a nutshell, it's decision making and reacting to those things. That's real agility. Reacting to what's going on. It's unpredictable. Like you said, they must react to the opponents, the ball, the space, and so forth. There's so many different things to it. And one thing that you said to me a while ago was, well, if it was easy to make players run as fast as Usain Bolt, why aren't they all running as fast as Usain Bolt? And that were a bit of a light bulb for me, really.
If you were a pro and you could add you could increase your top speed. Every single one of them would do it, wouldn't they? There would be no exception to that rule in it. Yeah.
I think for me personally, it's all because I was pretty slow as a player, and I think I'm convinced I would have been playing for Barcelona. I'd have been a bit.
Yeah, there's plenty of truth in that.
The thing that I heard recently, which I really liked, was it's harder to train a player to be faster, to become faster, harder to train speed. It's much easier to train a player to be in time. So instead of reducing that sprint time, it's easier to train them to be in time. And what the coach meant was the decision-making side of it. You look at some of the players, some of the better players in the Premier League over the last few years. I'm thinking about your David Silvas and your Bernardo Silvas at Man City. Not blessed athletically, certainly, not blessed with pace, lots of pace, but yet they always got to the ball a bit quicker. And they know, and it's training that part of it, which can only be done, excuse me, in a football context. So moving on, what we wanted to do was give coaches, I guess some what we've been doing to train this side of things, and parents as well. Some of the stuff for parents to watch out for. But for coaches, what do we do? What are better ways to look at training agility and speed if that's what you're looking to really do?
Yeah, well, if you're understanding that football movements can only come about as a result of the football environment, then to improve moving in football, then you need to play football. And then rather than just playing a full game, you can, as always, just manipulate your practice. So if you're playing in a smaller area with more players in, then it's likely that the player on the ball is often going to be faced in a situation where they might have to beat a defender or outplay a defender. So in those situations, that's where they might be doing shoulder drops and side-to-side movements. So that is going to be developing agility there. If you usually use full-size goals or big goals, which encourages players to shoot from further away, you might change that to smaller goals. So they're going to have to get closer to the goal. So again, it's probably going to put them in more situations where they're closer to defenders. They're going to have to evade defenders. As always, it depends on the level of your player. You might want to reduce the number of players that you've got, but have a bigger space to play in if your players aren't necessarily as good. So then they've got an opponent, but they've got a lot of space to beat that opponent in. Similarly, you might do like a man-to-man marking rule where you are only allowed to be tackled by your direct opponent. So yes, you're going to have a player to beat, but you're going to have a lot of space to outplay them in. So there's lots of different ways you can do that. One thing to bear in mind with all of that is agility and speed are often grouped together. If you're playing in smaller areas where there's lots of other players in there, yes, you're going to increase the number of evasive movements you potentially have to do, but you are going to reduce massively the opportunity for players to hit top speed. So if you want players to get faster, you want them to hit their top speed more often, you want them to hopefully push their top speed. Like with everything that we talk about, they actually have to be doing that. So if you're creating game situations which are small areas, lots of players in there, it's unlikely that players are going to hit their top velocity very often. So you're not going to be able to stretch that and develop that. So with everything, there's always trade-offs, but that'd be quite a big one in there. And then I suppose the other side of that is we're saying no to ladders and hurdles. There are times when they could be an effective thing to use. Injuries being the main one. If you've got a player returning from injury and you want them to move in certain ways to develop strength as a result of the injury they had, or not to move in certain ways because it might be a risk to them returning from injury, then ladders and hurdles and direct instructions are a very, very good way to manage that and deal with that load.
I'm going to come back to the speed thing in a second, but on that point, we had a request for a one-to-one, didn't we, recently, which I asked your opinion on, and I think the dad's daughter had dyspraxia, maybe.
Okay.
And he was looking for one-to-ones, and I think he was basically saying her movement, when she needs help with her movement, and that's where we were looking at it, thinking, well, in that case, would that be good? Looking at the basic movement, basic agility and speed and coordination, and then we'll try and get her more into the football context, get the ball involved a little bit more. I haven't done that session yet, but if that does get arranged, I'm going to be interested to give that a test and maybe talk to the dad about the reasons why we're going to start there first. But I think it's case by case, isn't it, sometimes? But on the whole, that's an exception to the rule. As we've said before, it doesn't become the rule. It's let's start with the football context. speed. So yeah, we're very games based. We love the games based model and use that a lot. But the 1v1 stuff could be where you maybe scale it down a little bit, and that could be where you're trying to reach top speed. It's a basic thing where they'd have to race to the ball or whatever. You can do bits like that to scale it down and reach those top speeds. But even then, we'd say, yeah, but can we still get a goal involved? Perhaps a goalkeeper, 2 goals. So then you have to attack then defend and whatever. But there are ways to scale your activities where you can still get some of the important elements of the game, but it doesn't need to be a match, I suppose, if you're looking to train those sorts of things. So yeah, hopefully that helps. It gives you a few little constraints and stuff that you could do. I toyed with the idea of re-releasing the speed training specifically for football, and we had a lot of weeks and weeks of conversations around it, and I had plans and stuff like that. But then we came to the conclusion, well, actually, would we be better just having a night of 3v3? Because would that train a lot of this stuff that we're talking about? But the kids love playing, and there's all the elements of a match there as well. We launched that back in nearly a year ago now, I think. And that's gone really well. It's just a Monday night, we play 3v3, we invite teams over to play against us, small-sided, loads of touches, but yeah, you're watching them and they're moving a lot, and they're having to become more agile to get past opponents or deal with the defending side of things, and that's been a good thing to see, really. Final thoughts then, and advice again for coaches and parents. I think, excuse me, the key takeaways for coaches is don't rely on hurdles and ladders if you are looking to maximise the development, the agility and speed and so forth of your players for football. If you want to help kids get faster for football, more agile for football, start with the game and improve it, because it improves their decision making at the same time, because it's all based around that. They're going to react to these things, like we've said. I think a lot of coaches listening to this, myself included, I was very guilty of, yeah, but we'll just do 10 minutes of SAQ stuff, then we'll do 10 minutes of skills, then we'll do and there'll be plenty listening to this that might only have an hour a week plus a match. So you need to maximise that time, and hopefully now you're going to realise that you can maximise that time and develop these sorts of things, but they're also going to be getting better at football at the same time. Because that was it when I remember I was trying to push it to get, yeah, we'll just start with that. And I'm glad we did. I'm glad we went away from that. Advice for parents would be to look at the coaches you're working with and the places that you're going to. Are they prioritising football-specific agility, which now hopefully you know what that means. You can't, if you've got a kid in a team and they love the team. I'm not saying pull them out and all that. That's not what we're saying. We're saying, could you maybe add a session where it is more football-specific and they're going to be developing these skills, but in a football context. And don't be fooled. We talk about this a lot. Don't be fooled into thinking just because something looks good that it is good, that it is developed. And again, myself, I've been guilty of that many times in the past, thinking that this will look great to parents, but not questioning actually is it the best thing for kids. So don't be fooled into thinking that, because it's not what you see isn't all there is sometimes, is there? And I think we speak to a lot of parents that are maybe looking for those 1%, when really the foundations haven't been built yet. The 99% basics haven't been nailed. If you can nail those, that's probably going to have more of an impact than a bit of agility training here and there. So nail the basics first, get to more football sessions first, and then after a few months you can reassess it. But that'd definitely be my opinion. Did you have anything else to add on that, Nicholas?
Oh yes, as you say, ladders and hurdles look good until you look at it properly and compare it to the sport that person is supposedly getting better at while doing this. And if it looks very different, then I think straight away you'd argue that it can't be an effective way to train. And then if you really grasp the idea of perception action, and that every movement is the result of something that's being perceived in the game environment first of all, then when you see players training movements that aren't the result of that process of perceiving the environment first and then reacting to it, then you're going to recognise that that isn't something that's going to help them in the game. They're not going to be improving something that's going to take into the game. And that's been tried and tested of a lot of sports. I gave the basketball example earlier. When you're shooting and then you shoot with a defender, you're moving in two completely different ways. Cricket, if you're playing against a bowler versus playing against a bowling machine, you are batting in a very different way. There's times to do those, like, you know, bowling machines, are useful because if you don't have a bowler present, at least she's able to return some balls. They're also useful because if you're asking a bowler to bowl that many times, that could be an injury risk. So it's not to say never use these things, but if you're just using a bowling machine, then your players are picking up information about when the ball is released that is completely different to when it's released from a bowler. So you could get really good at returning a bowling machine ball, but that might be giving you a disadvantage when you're actually facing a bowler in the real game environment. And that's really key to understand, that what looks like effective training might not be effective training, and it might actually be leading to detrimental performance in the game environment. So just keep it as real as possible.
Like we say with this doing the skills at home, we're never your ball mastery. We're not saying never do it. We're just saying that our time needs to be spent on the things that are going to have the biggest impact. If your child's at home blasting a ball against a wall for hours on end, it's much better than just being sat at home on a screen. We're just saying that, but if your child could play with a friend, then that's probably going to be better. And if your child can play in a group, that's going to be even better, and so on and so on and so on. So we're not saying there's never a time for these sorts of things. As you said, if you've not got access to a bowler or a teammate to play with, then yeah, fine. But it's just understanding the
it's more for coaches. And if you are a coach and your idea is skill development, I want to get these players better at what they're doing, then that's when you really need to question bowling machines or shooting without defenders and things like that.
Yeah. Right, thank you as always, Nick, and thank you everybody for listening.